Good afternoon. I'm Marcia Hall, a research officer with the African Caribbean Institute of Jamaica, Jamaica Memory Bank, located here in Kingston, Jamaica, the West Indies. I'm pleased to be making my presentation titled Commerce, Cruise and Community, Kingston Harbour and the Dynamic of Urban Culture, even though it's not listed there as such, but the paper is oh yes, it is, Kingston Harbour and the Dynamics of Urban Cultures. So just a brief background into the Kingston Harbour. It's ranked as the 7th largest natural harbour globally, and it is located in the metropolitan area of downtown Kingston. Now, the metropolitan city of Kingston is divided by some man-made social construct, of course, in uptown and downtown districts. So the uptown areas is where the more prevalent, well-to-do, moneyed section of Jamaica reside, whereas downtown Kingston is inflated with poor, marginalized, disadvantaged communities known as inner cities. So Kingston Harbour is a landlocked area approximately 10 miles long and 2 miles wide, guarded by the Palisado Peninsula, or what Jamaicans refer to as the Palisado Spit. Other boundaries exist westward, notably the volatile inner city communities of Tivoli Gardens, Denham Town, Kingston Gardens, Raytown, and Bournemouth Gardens. Jamaica's second largest airport, Norman Manley International, is also situated on the southern peninsula of Kingston Harbour. And it was this enclosure that attracted the English, who engineered protection of the harbour with 14 seaside forts in the Hellshire Hills that facilitated trade between Port Royal, Kingston, and Spanish Town. So before Jamaica became a colony of the British, it was governed by the Spanish. And during the war in 1655, Jamaica changed hands into that of the English. Port Royal, I'm not sure how many persons are familiar with the name Port Royal, but it was once referred to as the jewel of the Caribbean. It was this Port Royal that gave rise to many myths and legends, the famous Captain Henry Morgan, the pirates, and the Pirates of the Caribbean movie. Yes, it is this Port Royal. But unfortunately, it was destroyed by several earthquakes. And so in 1692, almost 2/3 of its resplendent grandeur forced most of its inhabitants to relocate elsewhere. And in 1872, the then Legislative Council decided to create a new town, and Kingston was declared the official capital of the colony of Jamaica. One plausible determination was the large and secure harbor that served a multiplicity of purposes: commerce, agriculture, trade, and recreation. So by 1890, Kingston had gained prominence as the largest and most important town of commerce in the British West Indies. The high level of dependency on slave labor and flourishing plantation economy was also diverse, with many slaves employed in agricultural production outside of sugar. So I should explain that Kingston Harbour as an open space is not detached from the past, as points of entry and exit navigating the importation and exportation of goods, that is, enslaved Africans, and now in contemporary society transformed into a site and space for community, cruise, and also cuisine, but rooted in the present, occupying an eminent social space for leisure and commerce. The harbor serves as a strong urban cultural signifier, reflecting feelings of freedom and evoking new practices, particularly those that continue to influence Jamaica's folk cultures, music, dress, dance, and patterns of cultural adaptation in an urban setting pre- and post-emancipation. This paper takes an ethnographic approach. We conducted structured interviews with individuals in the downtown Kingston metropole And we have discovered that downtown Kingston's urban culture in transition and under revitalization or redevelopment, because from the 60s up until now, downtown Kingston has been slated for redevelopment and revitalization. And this is is a government initiative manned by the Urban Development Corporation, or the UDC. I know it may be quite challenging to center downtown Kingston, a non-man-made resource, into the urban landscape of downtown Kingston, but it is a natural capital or asset that Jamaica has regrettably failed to optimize and take full advantage of, given the harbor direct and indirect use value. Essentially, the harbor suffers from underutilization and, of course, frequent pollutions of garbage, domestic sewage waste, and other industrial pollutants, considering that several industries are based on the shores. In 2023, just last year, the harbor and people who depend on it faced numerous problems following several fish kills in the harbor. And this led the government agency, the National Environment and Planning Agency, NEPA, to enforce actions against companies involved. However, this was a disruptive combination of environmental, social, and economic ills, and this has been a continuing issue. Since this affected residents, poor residents, marginalized residents in nearby communities, and fisher folks dependent on the harbor for their daily livelihood and sustenance. Luckily, we have several private companies or private sector initiatives such as the Grace Kennedy Foundation, the CB Faceit Foundation, Ocean Cleanup, a nonprofit environmental engineering organization, and of course the Jamaica Social Investment Fund that has stepped up to the forefront of the harbor's social and environmental transformation. But how is Kingston Harbour and adjacent communities featured or symbolized in downtown's urban culture? A majority of the harbor structure is dilapidated, and while not necessarily centered on communal life, the space represents mutual enjoyment, symbolic of cultural expressions with people from all walks of life. The urban infrastructural changes and national economic restructuring have dramatically altered the relations between people, harbor, and landscape. Yet, the urban cultural images, socioeconomic conditions of people living and working around the harbor is not far removed from disadvantaged inner cities, several of which have not experienced redevelopment since their original constructions from the 70s. Along with the technological changes around Kingston Harbor's port terminals, where we have the Port Authority of Jamaica, who is in charge of ships coming into the harbor, the Kingston Wharves Limited, who are responsible also again for these ports. We have these larger seafaring vessels and heavier containers requiring deeper water docking and state-of-the-art docks. So these have all gained a new presence in the public eye. It is not that a new type of city has emerged, but the re-emergence and creation of downtown Kingston, newest ports in the historic redevelopment path. And downtown Kingston is beautiful. It has a Magian Georgian architecture, many old buildings still intact, but of course they have been falling into disrepair. So in defining Kingston Harbour as an urban space and part of Jamaica's urban culture, what do we make of the interaction between communities and the harbour? To answer this question, I have conducted several interviews with entrepreneurs, informal entrepreneurs on the streets of downtown Kingston. And I'm so sorry I don't have the slides up at this moment in the interest of time, but for those who are interested in this presentation, you may contact the organizers of the conference for my email address, and I can send you photos, interviews, etc. So usually what happened is that downtown Kingston is filled with lots of businesses. And with this redevelopment initiative, we have many companies that have moved from uptown to downtown to capitalize on this, particularly where the waterfront is concerned. It's so beautiful. So we have the Digicel company, which is a large telecommunication giant within the Caribbean. Their head office is located downtown. The Bank of Jamaica head office is located downtown. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs relocated their offices downtown, and many more have followed. We have a new hotel, Rock Hotel, located downtown, and this has been attracting a new set of crowds because in formative years, you could have never find persons downtown who did not live downtown or who were not directly doing business. And the business owners downtown are really third generations of Syrian Lebanese communities who their fathers had business, opened haberdasheries there, and they have developed on it. So they have always been downtown, and we have recently Indians coming in over from India directly, and the Chinese, of course, occupying wholesale businesses downtown. So what the Jamaicans would do is purchase goods from them, and they would sell in the streets or on street corners and in the markets. I should mention the Coronation Market, which is the largest market in the English-speaking Caribbean for foodstuff, herbal remedies, etc. And I should point out that these markets, among others, are some of the positive legacies, if I may say, of the horrible history of slave labor. Moreover, plantation owners, in order to reduce the food provided to the enslaved, granted them access to provision grounds where their subsistent farming of ground provision and other crops were grown to feed themselves. So a positive outcome from this was that the enslaved Africans were allowed to keep any surplus, and from this, they established prosperous markets independent from the sugar estates. The proclivity of capitalism was fueled under the system of slavery within the Jamaican economy. A variety of commodity and produce were manufactured and sold by the enslaved Africans. They would frequently transact business and sell items in the urban centers, which include Kingston and Spanish Town. Traders and retailers of all different races typically purchase the food and other products sold by the enslaved. So downtown Kingston is a ground for entrepreneurship in the most creative modes, and the symbiosis between the marketplace and the people are very much intertwined. At present, let me speak of the commercial aspect of this research. At present, the commercial prospects of the harbor has expanded and heightened in transformative economic mode for Jamaica. As a unique, multifunctional logistic hub, the harbor is an invaluable contributor to the evolving maritime sector. The global, which is the local, regional, and global all into one. Through the numerous wharves and terminals involving Kingston Wharves Limited, again, a private entity, and one of the Caribbean's leading port terminal operator and logistic provider, and of course, the statutory agency, Port Authority of Jamaica, responsible, I must reiterate, for the safety of all vessels navigating Jamaica's ports of entry and the development of the country's port and shipping industry. So prior to the abolition of slavery in 1838, Jamaica had an economic system in which both Kingston's role and the rural-urban relationship was well defined, and to some extent still is. The physical structure of Kingston revolved around its port functioning, and today we still do. So any revitalization of downtown Kingston is inclusive of the ports and the communities, together with residents who live adjacent to the harbor and are directly connected to it. The artisanal fishing villages and communities adjacent to Kingston Harbor, Rockfort, Port Royal, Greenwich Town, and Greenwich Town Fishing Village, Hunts Bay are some of the principal locations for fish landing sites. In terms of cruise, we note the contrast of Kingston Harbour as an original site of tragedy to a sought after space for entertainment, fun, relaxation, and economic livelihood. One spectacle that was common along the waterfront during slavery was the Jonkuna bands, and these were traditional bands made up of masked characters who danced and entertained themselves in the street. Nowadays, Jonkuna bands have transformed into carnivals. Today's present carnival transition from the Jankuna bands. And of course, we still have traditional Jankuna bands, but they're not so prevalent these days. So persons refer to them as Jankunus or John Canos. Notwithstanding, there's much work to be done in centering the harbor in contemporary Jamaica for not just commerce, but to encourage more local outings and tourist visitors to the waterfront. And I must confess that the Jamaica Social Investment Fund, JSIF, have been doing a lot along with the UDC, the Urban Development Corporation, with the new boardwalk that is being built. Persons are now walking more in the evenings, they're jogging, and other urban renewal projects are slated for development. So there are still visible changes along Port Royal Street in the waterfront vicinity, and you can find persons strolling there at any given time. So I can quickly share some photographs of the harbor because it would be remiss of me to be speaking about the harbor and no photos are being shown at this time. So let me quickly, right? So as I said, Kingston Harbour is really a beautiful place. It's a beautiful place. And very important to Jamaica's economic development. So on any given day, you may find persons fishing along the harbor. Also several ships in the harbors as well. If you can see, that is the vicinity of the airport. I think I went a tad bit too much. So there we have an aircraft about to take off within the vicinity of the harbor. Another ship out in the harbor waiting to be inspected. So in concluding, before I conclude, I should also note that Kingston Harbour is very important historically again, and it is cemented in the global history where Kingston's own Victoria Pier exists. It is the site where the HMT Empire Windrush departed on May 24, 1948 and arrived in the United Kingdom in June 1948, marking the first ship to transport Jamaicans to the United Kingdom, and this is known as the Windrush era. So it is of significant importance as people transitioning from slavery to colonialism. So too are the strong cultural undercurrent that pays homage to Jamaica's history in the presence of street art and culture. The recent arrival of downtown newest transplants, known as the Kingston Creative, is a nonprofit organization that has breathed new life in the street art scene, and their monthly events to highlight local artisans and the best of Jamaican craftsmanship has introduced a new set of persons into downtown Kingston area. In concluding, when assessed through the combination of trade, investment, and urban planning, the harbor is potentially a major catalyst for Jamaica and the Caribbean economic development. The myriads of components notwithstanding, one cannot have natural resources without centering the greatest resources of any country, its people. A key insight here is the harbor and how communities of people utilize the space and the impact of their social and economic livelihood or community activities. At present, we're witnessing a paradigm shift in downtown Kingston. We affirm that the Kingston Harbour is not solely a maritime wonder, a logistic space, or for sightseeing, but it is a site around which urban cultures are materialized. Much can be said of the Kingston Waterfront Redevelopment Project in an attempt to introduce urban renewal in some of the most depressing and blighted areas of downtown Kingston. However, the research takes into consideration the vulnerable communities and how residents are integrated in programs and initiatives directly focused on the revitalization of downtown Kingston. After all is said and done, it is they who are most impacted by redevelopment projects. More than just a place for living, it is a sustainable and cultural life force. So the preservation of downtown urban cultural heritage has been explored and analyzed. The harbor is a special place. The history suggests that it is where, for centuries, the commerce, dwelling, livelihood of persons and everyday Jamaica life has and continues to do so over the years. Yes, there has been expansion and sprawl and migration, but downtown still remains a very important economic asset to Jamaica. It is a multi-diverse place of personalities, businesses, and culture, with much to explore and examine in this space. Thank you. As I said previously, any questions, kindly feel free to email me.